Hello and welcome to the second drawing pencil Bellringer. Today our focus is having accurate value matching from our reference photo to our drawing. You should ask yourself at the end of this practice, do the values you drew match the values in the reference photo? You can see the bad example has a very light sphere, and although the placement of the values looks correct, they don't match the picture, which is the problem. So this is the good example. This is what we're trying to avoid, going either too light or too dark. Sometimes a big problem is that students leave way too much white space as well. So that's something else that we're looking out for. Now to get started, go ahead and if you could please now grab the HB or 3B pencil, so a hard lead pencil, a 6B or a 5B pencil, so a soft leaded pencil, and your blending stump. Go ahead and collect those out of your blocks now. I am going to have you follow along with me for these first steps. So to begin, we are going to turn our paper. So everyone turn your paper to the side. We are going to continue these lines coming out from the outside edge of our rectangle. Then we're going to break this space in half by making a mark right in the middle. Go ahead and make those 3 lines, the one on the outside edge and one in the middle. Next, we are going to break each of these sections in half. So we're putting a line in the middle of these lines and a line right in the center here as well. That gives us 4 sections. Now we're going to break it down so that we're breaking each of those into half once more, which gives us 8. Now we're going to turn it back just to label, and we are going to write a 0 first, then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Now I like to turn my paper back, so I recommend doing that just because we are still on some of our first practices. And remember that each of these lines is where you should be transitioning, and that is indicating that you need to press lighter when you pass this line, and then lighter again when you pass this line. To begin, we're going to fill in from value 7, and we want this top section to be completely filled. I am starting with my 6B pencil, so make sure you've got a soft leaded pencil, either 5 or 6B, and we're filling this in so that it is so filled that it is shiny. We want to be extra careful in these corners. Remember, craftsmanship is important. We want to be neat when we're filling this in, and we want to make sure it is completely filled. You can check by lifting it up to see if it is actually reflective. Next, I'm moving into my 6th value, and to make this different, I am just pressing slightly lighter than what I did for that first level. So this should still be very, very dark. We are going to continue down, and a good reminder is that we are going to make value 3 the lightest value that we can make with this pencil. So we're just pressing super lightly. This is our lightest one that we can make with our soft leaded pencil. Now remember, we are bridging the gaps, so we know that we have to go from here to here, so you can kind of see how quickly we need to transition. Now for value 5, we are just making sure that we're pressing slightly lighter, and then for value 4, even lighter, and we're fading into value number 3. After you've reached this point, we're going to go back through. So go ahead and do this with me. We're going to look for any sections that might not have a smooth transition. So I'll give you a chance to just kind of get caught up to this point. When you are done, you can just kind of look through and see, are there any areas where you have some white maybe along the edge, or are there any areas where you can see a direct change from like a section, like an edge? And that is an area where you would need to continue working on smoothing out that transition between them. All right. Now we are going to move into our blending stump. Remember, it's important to always check it and clean it at the beginning of each process. So I am just checking and cleaning it by spinning it around. Sometimes they start off really dark because these are shared. So make sure that you kind of clean it off so you don't begin for your first value down here with an unexpected dark smudge. So we're going to start with value 1. Remember, with our blending stumps, we always begin in the lighter area. So I'm just barely adding any pressure at all to make this nicely transition into my white. Then for value 2, I'm just pressing a little bit harder, and that does help to get more of the graphite off onto the paper and to help it look slightly darker from value 1. Then we're moving into blending value number 3, and we're just going to work our way up. And we want to make sure that we go in that direction specifically, because if we start on the dark end and blend down, it's all going to change and be very, very dark, and we won't have any real transitions. So we always start on the light side so that we can see that smooth transition rather than accidentally just bringing the dark all the way down. And I'm working all the way up into that top section. So take a moment here, work on just blending that out with our blending stump, and remember this is our second layer. Now we are going to come in for our third layer with our HB pencil. So what we're doing here is looking for any patches that might be a little bit lighter, any areas that maybe need a little bit of help with their transitions. So we're looking for sections, we're looking for patches. Check the edges of your value scale to make sure that you filled it in all the way to that outside edge of this rectangle. I'll give you a moment to get caught up. All right, even if yours is not quite perfect, that is okay. Go ahead and follow along with me now. We're gonna spin this paper back so that it is facing us. What we're going to do next, I'm gonna pick up my 6B or 5B pencil. We're starting with layer 1 again, so we go back to the beginning. Now to get set up to help us and to remember some of the steps we learned from our accurate shape, size, and location of values practice, we need to get a little bit of a guideline going to tell us where those values need to be. So first we're going to start on the outside edge of the circle. Everyone set your pencil on the outside edge of the circle. We're going to draw a line going straight down. Now set your pencil on this outside edge, and we're going to draw a line coming straight out. This triangle is going to tell us where our values begin and where they end. So we are going to start by making this small little highlight section by just connecting that top part of the triangle to the bottom part of the triangle here. And we want to encourage that curve in the middle. We're going for kind of like a really stretched out C shape. So we want to have a nice curve. Next, we are going just slightly above the tabletop, and we are going to bring this down to that same point. And here's our little triangle here. So go ahead and get that set up. Now we are going to work on creating this exact value scale inside of this top triangle, this skinny stretched out triangle. We'll begin with our 6B or 5B. We want to go all the way up against the edge here, and this is going to be that solid dark number 7. So we're filling it in until it is shiny. Then we are slowly lightening our pressure, and we're working in just like little oval shapes. We don't want to see directional lines here. So working in ovals, and we're going to stretch it out, and we're just getting to about like a 4, not quite even to a 3. We want to keep this kind of a dark medium. What we're going to do next is fade this out with our 6B pencil. So we are going to create a value scale going this direction and going out this direction. So we want to help this transition going both directions. So we're going to start underneath, that's a little bit easier, and I am just adding a nice light transition. This top part is the hardest area, so you do kind of have to round that out a little bit so that we can fade it out, and we're just going to make this a nice light 3. And we don't want to leave any white down here at the bottom. So we're filling that in with like our lightest value that we can color with a pencil, which is number 3. Now we're going to make our value scale going out this way. And remember that we really want to encourage this eyeball shape. See how this looks like an eyeball? So we are going to start with the top section here, and we're going along this edge, and we are going to just try to help get this to blend out to white as smoothly as possible. So I'm going to just start at this top area because that is the harder edge. And I'm just helping this to fade out to white by pressing lighter and lighter as I work my way out. Now I'm starting to really think, okay, how can I make this eyeball shape? So I'm just bringing this up and lifting that value up and around. And we're just adding that lightest value, and we're trying to leave a white eyeball shape up at the top. And then we're going to pause and switch for our second layer. I'll give you a moment to get caught up. Next, we're going to bring in our blending stump. So I'm just going to take a moment to clean mine off because we want to start out super light, especially because we are working from this white edge out. Now I'm going to start with my blending stump, and I'm just making like the world's lightest outline of this eyeball shape. So I'm like bringing that around, and sometimes it's helpful to like put your finger here so you can really follow along and make sure that that is the right shape. Now I'm starting on my lighter end, and we're working towards the dark. So I'm just blending out the area that we added. That's the lightest, that value 3, that was working on fading out from this original stretched out triangle. Now I'm going to start on this lighter end of the triangle, and I'm working my way backwards towards the dark here. We want to just blend those together. I'm going to clean my blending stump off, and then I'm going to just continue blending out this highlight that is underneath. Remember, we don't want that to be white, so make sure that it is lighter than the triangle, but not white left behind. Now I'm going through and looking to see if there are any parts of this sphere that I can continue to blend out. So if you've got a section, then that is something that you should be focusing on with your blending stump. So go ahead, take a moment to just work through blending and getting this as smooth as possible. This is for sure the hardest part of this practice, so if it is difficult for you, remember that this is just one of your first attempts. This is only the second time that you've tried it with actual instruction, and you're just going to keep getting better as we work through this. With all of this practice and all of my instructions, you're going to be just making the most amazing spheres at the end of this unit. Now we are moving into our third layer, so I'm bringing in my HB pencil, and I'm going to just work on paying attention to my reference photo, and I notice that I've got like a little bit more dark coming through in my picture than I do in my drawing. So I'm just really trying to kind of darken up this space, and I'm working on filling any patches that might be left behind. Anything that doesn't blend smoothly, I'm just working on blending that out now. All right, now we are going to continue into our background space. So we're done with our sphere. If you're not quite finished, that's okay, but I still would like for you to follow along with me for this next step. So we are switching back to our first layer. We're starting with our 6B or 5B. I'm going to begin by turning my page, and this is a big part of this practice of filling in the background, because we want to learn that we have to see right where our pencil is touching the line. And if you have your pencil just like this and you are drawing this way, your lead is in the way. You can't tell if it's actually touching or not. So you do have to turn your paper to see once it's actually touching. You can't quite tell if it's not turned. Now I'm going to fill this entire triangle in with solid black. And then I'm going to give myself a border. So this goes out straight and then kind of curves in. This comes out straight and then kind of curves in at the end. Now I am going to just work on filling this in, and we want to have it fade just a small amount at the very end. So we keep this very dark all the way through, and then at the end here is where it starts to transition to a bit of a lighter value, probably like a 5 or a 6. So there is our shadow. We are going to do all of our background for our first layer. So we're going to come in with a like a 4 value, I would say, and we want to fill our entire countertop or table, and we want to leave a little white sliver at the top edge. So when we fill our background, we want to avoid having lines show up. So I highly encourage you to use tiny circles to fill this background space. So we're just using tiny circles. The front is slightly lighter than what you see in the background, so sometimes I do try to show that. So we are just coloring slightly lighter than what we did in that background space. We're going to leave this little highlight off to the side. And as I work on filling in my tabletop here, I'm going to turn my page as well and make sure that I'm filling it in and getting that line to be nice and crisp. Remember, you have to turn your paper to be able to see if you're actually touching the edge. So you should all be turning your paper as you're working through this. Now I'm going to turn it back, and we are just working on filling in our tabletop with those small circles. Remember that we don't want to have lines show up in this space. So if you do have lines that are visible, you need to switch to working with little circles. So we're filling this in. Now we are going to fill the top, which is going to be like a 6 value. So not quite our darkest one, but very dark. We are going to fill along this edge. Be very careful as you're filling up against those lines. We want them to be as crisp as possible. So we're going to turn our paper, and I like to begin this step by just giving myself the full border all the way around. So I'm just using my pencil to go right up against that edge. I've turned my paper, so you should have turned your paper as well. And once we've given ourselves the round edge, I also like to give myself that outside border just to make it easier and quicker to fill in and not have it go outside of that space. So I'm just filling that edge so that I know it's nice and filled in. We won't accidentally leave gaps there, which is quite common. All right. So now we've got that border. I am just going through and filling in with small circles here. And we're using like a 6 value, so not quite that darkest value of 7, but fairly close. We do want the top to look significantly darker than the actual table. Once you've filled it all the way in, now is your chance to go through and look for any patches that might be lighter or any lines that you might need to fill the gap between. We want this to be super smooth. And once you've done that, we are moving on to our second layer. So we're going to come back in with our blending stump. Remember, we start with our lightest areas first, and rather than using the point of your blending stump, try using the side edge of your blending stump. It will help avoid creating lines in your piece, And it also helps you to fill it in much quicker because that's a larger surface area than just working with the point of your blending stump. So we are filling this in, and as we do that, remember that we always try to narrow out these little highlights at the top of our table. We want them to be as small as we can make them while still being visibly white. We're continuing on to the other side. I like to fill the rest of my tabletop before doing that shadow so it doesn't darken this tabletop on accident. Now I'll work on the shadow, just blending that out so it's nice and smooth. And I will move into the background, and I'm using that side edge of my blending stump. Be careful not to put too much pressure on your blending stumps as you're working on this part. It is very common for students to kind of use too much pressure and then it just snaps those blending stumps. So be very careful that you are not accidentally putting too much pressure because you don't want to break one of these. We're just going through, filling those little patches. We want this to be as smooth as we can get it from this second layer. Now we are going to switch to our HB pencil and complete our third layer. You may still be working on the last step, and that's still okay. I'm looking for any patches with my HB that I might be able to just go back through and continue working on building those layers and making them look smoother. I'm gonna darken up my shadow under the sphere. I noticed that I maybe didn't fill it in as dark as I could have directly underneath. Now we're going to look back and forth between our pictures, and what we're doing now is very specific to this practice. So now we are doing our accurate value matching. So we are trying to look and say, okay, do these values really match? Now, one thing that I notice is that my highlight is way too bright at this point. So that does not match. So I need to go back through and just give that another layer with my blending stump so that I can make sure that my values are truly matching that reference photo. I would also highly recommend that you take your value finders and go through and try to actually match with those value finders and the holes that you can use to check. So go through and check with your value finders to make sure that you've got all of your values correct. I notice as I'm doing this step that there are some patches in my background space. So I am just going through and filling those in with my HB pencil to make them look a little bit neater. So this is just a time for perfecting. I want you to really go through and try to match those values and see if there's anything that you can do to make this image that you drew look more like the image you were using for your reference photo. All right, so we are just finishing up that final step of perfecting, and we are just looking back and forth now to compare our reference photo to our drawing to make sure that we've got everything as neat and accurate and matching values as possible. And now you ask yourself, do the values you drew match the values in the reference photo? All right, thank you guys.